Book 1, The Beginning of the End, Chapter 1. I woke up shaking. I panicked at first, thinking I was having a stroke or something. Then I opened my eyes, relieved, as I remembered it wasn't me that was shaking, it was my apartment. Outside the wall of dusty, industrial-style windows beside my bed came what sounded like a regiment of giants, rhythmically striking concrete with their rifle butts in a parade drill. But it wasn't the Jolly Green Marines. I knew it was the elevated number 1 Broadway local, rattling to shake the dead back to life next to my new 5th floor Harlem loft apartment. Hadn't gotten used to that train yet. I winced, covered my head with a pillow. Useless. Only in New York did one have to actually pay for the privilege of sleeping beside an overpass. But I was so broke I couldn't even afford to complain. I sat up. I couldn't even really afford to sleep. I couldn't even afford to think about money. I had spent it all, and then some. My credit was in the sewer. By that point, I was in tunnel vision mode, focusing my entire life on one desperate need: to figure things out before it was too late. Things hadn't always been so dire. Only 2 years before, not only had I lived in a non-vibrating apartment, I was actually on the PhD fast track at Columbia University. I was the golden boy in the ecology, evolution, and environmental biology department. So close to the brass ring, I could practically smell the book contracts, the cocktail parties, the cushy university appointments. But then I came into contact with the event, what others called the mistake, that changed my life. I noticed something that wasn't quite right, something I couldn't let go. That's the way it happens sometimes. Life is flowing along like a fairy tale, and then you see something that you just can't categorize, something that starts filling your every thought, your every dream, your every waking moment. At least that's the way it happened with me. One minute I was about to realize my goal of academic greatness, and the next I was wrestling with something I couldn't stop thinking about, something I couldn't shake, even as my world crashed around my ears. I know how nuts it sounds. Intellectual promise plus obsession plus throwing away conventional success usually ends pretty badly. It certainly did for Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and Chris McCandless, the Into the Wild guy who died on that bus. But I wasn't some malcontent or mystic trying to form a deep intrinsic connection to an ultimate reality. I was more like Chicken Little, an evolutionary biologist Chicken Little, who had detected that the sky actually was falling. Except it wasn't the sky that was falling, it was worse. Biological life was falling, animal life itself. Something very, very weird and very, very bad was happening. And I was the only voice shouting in the wilderness about it. Before I get ahead of myself, my name's Oz. My first name is Jackson, but with a last name like mine, no one uses it. Unfortunately, my father is also known as Oz, as are my mother, my 3 sisters, my uncles, and all my paternal cousins, which gets confusing at family reunions, but that's neither here nor there. What is here and there, everywhere, is the global problem I was monitoring. The global problem I'd by that point pretty much devoted my life to trying to figure out. Sounds grandiose, I know, but I feared that if I were right, and for the first time in my life I truly hoped I was wrong, a planetary paradigm shift was underway. that was going to make global warming feel like a Sunday stroll through an organic community garden. Chapter 2. I hopped out of bed wearing a pair of wrinkled gray pajama bottoms that Air France had gifted me with on a recent flight to Paris. Shaved, showered, teeth brushed, I got back into the fancy French pajamas. Working from home has its perks. Okay, working implies I was making money. This was another kind of work. Anyway, they were really comfortable pajamas. Coming out of my bedroom, I retrieved another prized possession from the doorknob. My fire engine red woolen hat, which I had acquired on a recent trip to Alaska. With my thinking cap firmly on the bottle, I got down and pumped out my daily 100 push-ups, a habit I'd picked up on yet another jaunt, a 4-year stint in the U.S. Army before college. PE complete, I headed into my shop. I flipped the surge protector switches, turning on the TV sets that I'd lined across the metal workbench in the center of the industrial-style room. There were 8 of them in all. Some were nice new flat screens, but most were junkers I'd picked up diving. Dumpsters after the digital signal changeover. Behind them, a Gordian knot of wires connected them to cable boxes and satellite receivers and a set of laptops and computer servers that I'd modified with the help of some electronic buddies of mine into the world's biggest, baddest DVR. As I waited for everything to boot up, I popped my first Red Bull of the day. Another number 1 train kicked up my heart rate along with a cloud of dust off the windowsills. Call me crazy, go ahead, you wouldn't be the first, but after the initial shock, I kind of like my apartment's MTA-provided soundtrack. I don't know why, but from the time I was a little kid up until I received my Rhodes Scholarship, my ADD-addled brain tended to fire on all cylinders when it was surrounded by headbanging noise. Old school AC/DC, that was my bag. Metallica, Motorhead, with all the knobs cranked to 11. I frowned at the lightening screens, remembering my father, a lieutenant in the FDNY, watching the evening news. After a Bronx 4 alarmer, he would come home, drop in front of the tube, and at the first commercial, after a Miller High Life or 2, he would say, "Oz, boy, sometimes I think this world of ours is nothing but a damn zoo." In front of me, animals began to fill the screens. Lots of them. All of them behaving very badly. Fathers really do know best, I guess, because that's exactly what was happening. The world was becoming a zoo without cages. Chapter 3. Settling back into my tag sale leather rolling chair, I lifted a new legal tablet from the fresh stack on the table to my right, clicked a pen, wrote the date. I turned up the volume on set number 4. A missing 72-year-old hunter and his 51-year-old son were found dead yesterday, said a correspondent from WPTZ in Plattsburgh in upstate New York, a good-looking brunette in a red coat. She held the microphone as though it were a glass of wine. The men were apparently killed by black bears while illegally hunting outside of Lake Placid. The camera cut to a shot of a young state trooper at a press conference. Buzz cut, lanky, country boy, uncomfortable in front of cameras. No, there was no way they could have been saved, the trooper said. He blew his P's and B's straight into the mic. Both men were long dead and partially eaten. What's still puzzling to us is how it happened. Both of the men's weapons were still loaded. He ended the report with the claim that the father and son were known poachers, fond of using an illegal hunting method known as deer dogging, using dogs to chase out and ambush deer. "Back to you, Brett," the brunette said. "Not good, Brett," I said, as I muted set 4 and cranked up set 8. Blip, blip, blip went the green bars on the screen. On it, a news program from NDTV, a sort of English-speaking Indian version of CNN, was starting. A Karalan Mahout was killed yesterday while he was training elephants, the middle-aged anchorman said. He had a mustache and a Bollywood swipe of hair. There was something of Clark Gable about him. Please be advised, the footage we are about to show you is graphic in nature. He wasn't kidding. I watched as an elephant tied to a stake in a village square stomped a little guy in front of her into the ground. Then she wrapped her trunk around the guy's leg and tossed him up in the air. The anchorman explained that the attack had occurred while the mother elephant was being separated from its baby during a training ritual known as Fajaan. I'd heard of it, also known as torture training. Fajaan is the preferred way of elephant training in rural parts of India. A baby elephant is separated from its mother and put in a cage so villagers can whack it with hot irons and sticks that have nails on the ends. The brutal beating continues to the point where either the baby elephant allows itself to be ridden or dies. Guess Ma wasn't down with the program, dude, I said to the dying elephant trainer on the screen. But the piece de resistance was the breaking news I pulled off Fox News on set 2. The Barbie doll on TV informed me that 2 lions from the LA Zoo had not only killed their keeper and escaped, they had also killed some guy on a nearby golf course. On the screen, half a dozen LAPD with M16s cordoned off a block lined with palm trees. People from animal control milling around behind them in white jumpsuits. The lions were last spotted in the La Brea neighborhood near Beverly Hills, chirped Megan Kelly, her vacant eyes nailed to the teleprompter. I threw down my pen. I was pissed. Skin itching, heart going like a hammer. Was everyone asleep, under hypnosis? High? Was everybody friggin' stoned? I grabbed the pen again and scribbled 3 letters on the pad, hard enough to tear the paper. H-A-C, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Then I threw the pad of paper across the room. When will you people listen? I yelled at my wall of media. It was time for more caffeine. Chapter 4. I sat bent over in my chair for a few minutes of therapeutic seething. I listened to an uptown train blasting by my window, then a downtown one. Then I crossed the room, picked up the pad again, and went back to work. HAC. Human-animal conflict. This was the theory I was working on. Basically, it was my belief that all throughout the world, animal behavior was changing. Not for the better, either. Not even a little. On every continent, species after species was suddenly displaying hyper-aggressive behavior toward one particular animal. The enemy was us, you and me, people. Man. The facts were undeniable. From Romania to Colombia, From the Pyrenees to the Rockies, from St. Louis to Sri Lanka, there had been an exponential increase in animal attacks on humans by wild leopards, bears, wolves, boar, all kinds of different animals, you name it. In fact, the worldwide rate of wild animal attacks in the last 4 years was double the average of the previous 50. For emphasis, I repeat, double. It wasn't just wild animals either. In Australia, injuries from cats and dogs had swelled by 20%. In Beijing, it was 34%. In Britain, nearly 4,000 people had needed hospital treatment for dog bites in the previous year. For some reason I hadn't pinned down yet, some kind of concerted trans-species evolutionary backlash against Homo sapiens was underway. Or, to put it in other terms, something was driving animals to go haywire, and the time to do something about it was running out quicker than the plastic wand supply at a Harry Potter convention. I know how it sounds, Wingnut City. Different species of non-human animals working in some sort of collusion against humans. It's absurd, insane, impossible. I used to think it was a big, strange coincidence too. Just lots and lots of totally unrelated, isolated incidents. Initially, it was just a goof among my colleagues that I'd started to track the phenomenon on my tongue-in-cheek blog, Man Against Nature. I stopped laughing when I started looking at the evidence more closely. Nature actually was at war with man, and our side wasn't even noticing. The expression between the devil and the deep blue sea is a nautical one. The devil is what old sailors used to call the seam between two hard-to-reach planks on a ship. In order to caulk it, one had to be suspended from a plank held over the water. If you fell into the ocean, it was certain death. If you didn't caulk the plank, the ship might sink. Either way was dangerous. Either way, you were screwed. That's exactly where I was now, out on a line, suspended between bad and worse. I felt like I was out there caulking the devil, hanging above the deep blue sea. If I was wrong, I was crazy. If I was right, the world was doomed. I'd been doing my best to get the word out, but was getting nowhere. I'd maxed out all my credit cards and those of several sympathetic relatives, speaking to anyone who would listen. My trip to Paris was for the purpose of attending an animal rights conference that I'd fibbed my way into in order to get some speaking time. I only got about halfway through before I was laughed off the stage. No, people weren't getting on board in the slightest. You'd be shocked and dismayed at the amount of intellectual intolerance directed at people who favor red lumberjack hats and wrinkled pajamas. The LA Zoo thing I just seen was the topper. The report had said that the cats had been born in captivity. Why would a pair of zoo lions one day just decide to start killing people and rampage through a city? Because there are 200 channels and nothing is on? It didn't make sense. Zoo lions don't just go out berserking. There's simply no reason for them to. Until now. I speed dialed my press agent to try to get on Fox. As usual, I got kicked immediately into voicemail. Even she thought I was nuts and I paid her. Not a good sign. After I recorded my latest plea to her, I decided to do the only thing I could think of. I plugged myself into my iPod and blasted some Motorhead to get some much-needed mental juices flowing. Help me, Lemmy. I slurped more Red Bull and tried to think while watching some more of the world's unfunniest videos. I sat up when Attila yanked my earbuds out. "Yo, Attila," I said. My roommate held out his hand for a low five. I gave it to him. "Look at this craziness. Every time I think things are gonna calm down, the activity doubles. Sarah won't call me back. Boy who cried wolf, I feel your pain, you know." And then there's some unusual word that looks to be a noise, said Attila. Then he made a few panting hoots and scrambled into my lap and gave me a sloppy kiss and hairy-armed hug. Attila, by the way, is a chimpanzee. Chapter 5. I knew the TVs bothered him, so I took Attila by his hand. It was leathery and surprisingly soft, like a glove, and led him into the kitchen. Attila, 5 years, 4 feet, and 100 pounds of chimpanzee. For breakfast, I gave him a mango, a stack of Fig Newtons, which he went ape over, and half a leftover turkey club. Today's featured dessert was applesauce mixed with crushed up vitamins and Zoloft. That's right, Zoloft. Even apes need happy pills in our crazy world. Or maybe just the ones who live in New York City. I brushed Attila's teeth and brought him back to his room. Scattered across the newspaper-covered floor were Attila's playthings. A sandbox, a toy chest filled with balls and dolls, an air hockey table, and an old Papa-Shot basketball machine. Actually, those last two were more my toys than his. But the Wii was definitely Attila's. He could kick my ass at bowling. I stood in the doorway and watched him play a little while. I'd fixed up the doorway to his room with a sturdy grate of steel wire, though he was getting older, and I knew it wouldn't be long before he found a way around it. I'd have to find another home for him soon. Attila's favorite toy these days was an American Girl doll I'd recently bought him. She had braids and a gingham dress. Very Little House on the Prairie. Attila rocked the big blonde-haired doll back and forth and kissed her. Then he brought her over to me and held her up so I could kiss her too. Attila panted content and took the doll back over to the beanbag chair in the corner and began to pretend to feed her. The people who say their dogs are like children to them never lived with a chimp, believe you me. I shook my head and smiled at my little buddy. It was nice to see him quiet, calm, having fun. That certainly hadn't been the case when we first met. I found Attila 2 years before at the Willis Institute, a South Jersey biomed shop where I'd been hired as a lab temp. I was cleaning up late on my second day when I opened a door and there he was, the cutest damn 3-year-old ape you ever saw, lying there with his pink face pressed against the cold bars of his tiny cage. He was staring at me miserably, his eyes red-rimmed, his nose running to beat the band. Most biomedical research with chimps works like this. They infect the chimp with some disease before giving it the new cure they wanted to test out. If the cure doesn't work, then whatever, the chimp dies, or they look for side effects and so on. Flipping through the paperwork attached to the cage, I saw that some intrepid human had been doing some type of weird olfactory research on him, testing perfumes or something. When this little ape, he wasn't Attila yet. Back then he was number 579. Looked at me so searchingly, so sadly. With his big brown eyes, my sucker's heart came up with a plan. A week after the job ended, I found myself heading south down I-95 again with the do not copy lab key I'd very absent-mindedly forgotten to return. When I pulled out of the lab's parking lot after midnight, Attila was lying down in the back of my beat-up Hyundai Sonata, covered in Papa John's pizza boxes. The first few weeks in my apartment, he'd been wary, hyper-vigilant, hardly getting any sleep, as he waited fearfully to see if I would hurt him. A vet friend of mine diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder and wrote out a script for the Zoloft, which worked like a charm. I know what you're thinking. I'm either a left-wing animal rights loon, or I watched one too many episodes of BJ and the Bear as a kid, or insane, or an idiot. I usually don't tell other scientists I have a chimp in my apartment. I never planned on being the 21st century man with the yellow hat. It just kind of happened. My original thought was to drop Attila off at an animal sanctuary in rural Louisiana that takes in retired research monkeys. And that is still my eventual plan, but for the time being, Attila lives with me. Attila put the doll down and walked to the door of the terrace off his room, tapping on it to be let out onto the fenced-in outdoor space where I'd set up a tire swing. "Think fast, Attila. Pit attack," I said, digging in for tickles. And then he makes silly monkey noises. I watched him knuckle run over to the swing and jump on it with a scream of joy before he turned, shut the gate, and headed back to work. Chapter 6. Lying face down in the tire swing, Attila waves his long, powerful arms to swing himself back and forth. The tips of his long, knotty fingers graze the ground. Strong, lean arms built for climbing trees. Like most chimps, Attila likes to play. He likes wrestling, laughing, being tickled. And like humans, he is sharply status conscious and capable of deception. He is more like people than any other living creature. When Attila spies the man down the hallway, he makes a high, curt cry, indicating his agitation, his anxiety. Getting no response, Attila crashes back into the tire swing and hurtles himself back and forth, the chain creaking loudly under the strain. Everything is so strange. The moving box-like shapes below, the small thunder overhead sometimes. Sometimes everything suddenly has the smell, the scary smell, the bad smell, the one that used to fill his cage in the big, bright room, the smell that makes Attila's stomach hurt and the fur on his back stand straight up. The smell is getting stronger, always stronger, even outside, more and more each day. Bored, angry, afraid, Attila turns away from the window and searches around his play area until he finds the mirror. He holds it up in front of his face and looks at himself. Like all chimps, he recognizes himself. He's now 5, and his face is losing its pinkish tinge and getting darker. His tuft of wiry white chin hair is almost gone.